Okay, so you're here for the deep dive, which means you're ready to really get into some stuff
Hmm.
today. We're diving deep into self-regulated learning and how important mental effort is,
Absolutely.
specifically for problem solving, which is, crucial for STEM fields. And we've got some really cool research to help us understand this better, some uh, insights from educational psychology that, I think can really help you as a learner.
Yeah. So when we talk about self-regulated learning, people often think about memorizing facts or like reading a textbook,
Hmm.
the planning, doing the work, and then kind of checking to see if you got it. But problem solving, especially in STEM, it's a whole other ballgame.
It is. It's a different set of cognitive processes.
Yeah.
So, monitoring how well you understand something and then adjusting your learning becomes more challenging.
Right. And what's interesting is that students often misjudge their understanding when they're actually in the process of solving a problem. They might think they're doing well, but then they hit a wall.
They do.
And so, being able to accurately monitor your understanding, that's key to self-regulation. And that's what leads to better learning outcomes.
Yeah, makes sense. So, this is where mental effort comes in. It's not just about how long you study,
Yeah.
but the amount of cognitive effort you're actually putting in.
Right.
And I think Paz and his colleagues back in 2003 defined it really well. They said, mental effort is like the cognitive capacity that you're allocating to a task. So in this deep dive, we're going to look at mental effort on two levels. First, how it works when you're solving a single problem, and then how it impacts your decisions about what to learn next.
Exactly. So let's start with that first level, the individual problem level. This is often referred to as item level self-monitoring. It's basically, you're deciding if you need to spend more time on a particular type of problem. And one really effective way to do this is through what we call generative learning activities.
I like that term, generative learning activities. It makes it sound so active, like you're really creating something.
Right, and that's exactly the point.
So you're not just passively absorbing information. You're actually constructing your understanding. And Fiorella and Mayer, in their 2016 work, emphasize just how important these effortful tasks are for deep learning.
Yeah. So think about it like this. Instead of just reading a recipe, you're actually trying to cook the dish. That active generation process really solidifies your understanding.
I like that analogy. It makes it so clear.
And there are different types of generative activities, like you can try solving similar problems after you've seen a worked example, or complete partially solved
Oh,
problems.
that's a good one. I've seen that used a lot.
Yeah. Or explaining the steps in your own words, as if you were teaching someone else, and even comparing your solution with the correct one.
Right. And what's really fascinating is that the research on these activities has some pretty interesting and sometimes unexpected findings. For example, Bars and his colleagues in 2014 found that when students try to solve a practice problem after studying a worked example, they get better at predicting how they'll do on similar problems in the future.
That's right. And they call that perspective monitoring. It's being able to judge your future performance.
And they found the same thing in a 2017 study using heredity problems. So it seems like there's something about that active problem solving right after seeing a worked example that really helps you calibrate your understanding.
Right. But here's the thing. Effort doesn't always equal understanding.
Oh, that's interesting. So how so?
Well, in another study, Bars and his team, this one in 2013, found that sometimes when students were filling in the missing steps of a partially worked out problem, they actually underestimated their performance.
Huh. That's counterintuitive. You would think if you're putting in the effort, you would feel like you're learning.
You would, but it seems like that struggle to complete those steps, it might be misinterpreted as a sign of not understanding, even if it's leading to learning. So the takeaway here is that just because something feels hard doesn't mean you're not learning.
Right. Embrace the struggle. Love that. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. The feeling of effort might not always be a reliable indicator. And speaking of potentially misleading cues, what about self-explaining, where you talk through the steps of a problem? Did that consistently help students judge their problem-solving skills?
Actually, no, not consistently. A 2018 study by Bars and others found that it didn't always lead to more accurate self-assessments.
Hmm. That is surprising. What do you think that is? Maybe just saying something out loud doesn't always mean you truly understand it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what cues learners are actually paying attention to when they're judging their understanding. Interestingly, that same study also found that students were much more accurate at assessing themselves on simpler problems compared to complex ones.
Okay, so it's not just that the easier problems are easier, the complexity itself seems to mess with our self-assessment. And this reminds me of the unskilled and unaware effect that Kruger and Dunning talked about.
Oh, absolutely.
If you don't know what good performance looks like, how can you judge yourself?
Exactly. When you're less skilled, you might just lack the knowledge to evaluate yourself properly. You don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what the target is. So in all of these generative activities, which ones seem to be the most helpful for getting an accurate picture of your understanding?
Comparing your work to the correct solution seems to be really effective. There was a 2014 study by Bars and colleagues, and another paper by Udman and colleagues that's been submitted for publication, both showing strong evidence for this.
Oh, that makes sense. Seeing exactly where you went right and wrong, that gives you very concrete feedback.
Right, you have that clear benchmark. And this all connects back to the Q utilization framework that Coryat put forward in 1997.
Oh, right. Can you remind us what that is again?
Sure. Basically, it says that when you're trying to figure out how well you've learned something, you use different pieces of information, or cues. These cues can come from the material itself or from your experience while you're learning. And the accuracy of your judgment depends on how reliable those cues are. But in general, effortful generative activities provide better cues for understanding the gist of something.
The gist. I like that. Okay, so how does the mental effort we're putting in, how does that act as a cue, especially at that item level when we're working on a single problem?
Well, research suggests that we might actually use the amount of effort as a cue for understanding, but there seem to be two ways to interpret it. On the one hand, we might see high effort as a sign of poor understanding. This is so hard, I must not be getting it.
Oh yeah, I've definitely felt that. Like, why am I struggling so much?
Right. It's a data-driven interpretation. You're focusing on your immediate experience. But the other way to interpret high effort is that it means learning is happening.
Okay, so high effort, good sign.
Yeah. You're engaged, you're working hard, and that struggle might actually be helping you build a deeper understanding.
I like that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then is, when is effort a reliable cue, and when might it lead us astray?
Well, a few things matter. First, how accurate are you actually being? If you're putting in a ton of effort but constantly getting things wrong, that's not a good sign. Second, the design of the activity matters.
So it's not just about blindly putting in effort. The activity itself has to be designed well.
Exactly. If it's needlessly complex or not providing the right support, then your effort might not be reflecting your true understanding. And finally, is the activity actually leading to learning? If it is, then that effort, even if it feels challenging, might pay off in the long run.
Makes sense. So we've talked about mental effort at the individual problem level. What about that task sequence level you mentioned? What is that, and how does mental effort play a role there?
Yeah. So at the task sequence level, it's about making decisions about what to learn next, based on what you already understand. It's more strategic. We're choosing from tasks with different levels of difficulty or different levels of support.
Okay. So instead of just deciding whether to redo the same problem, you're thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, should I move on to a harder problem or go back and review something?
Exactly. And at this level, accurate self-assessment becomes even more critical.
Yeah, because if you don't have a good grasp of what you know, how can you make good decisions about what to do next? You might end up wasting time on stuff that's too easy or get totally frustrated by things that are way too hard.
Absolutely. Both of those scenarios can really kill your motivation. So, what does research say about the choices students actually make?
Yeah, what are people actually doing when they're in charge of their own learning?
Well, a 2018 study by Foster and colleagues looked at university students, and they found that students chose a mix of worked examples and practice problems. The use of worked examples decreased over time, especially after they made mistakes.
Okay, so they're kind of adjusting based on how they're doing. But did they start with worked examples?
Interestingly, no. They rarely started with examples.
Huh, that is interesting. You would think, based on what we know about the benefits of worked examples, that they would start there.
You would. But remember, research is always evolving and different studies can show different things. Like Van Harsel and colleagues did a study with higher education students learning math, and they found something different. A lot of students started with video modeling examples at the easiest level, and they continued to choose examples throughout the process.
Oh, interesting. So there are some differences in how people approach it. And is there any connection to how well students were doing overall?
Yeah, they found that lower scoring students tended to stick with easier tasks and examples for longer. Now, it's hard to say for sure whether those choices were helpful, maybe they needed that extra foundation, or if it reflected maybe less effective self-regulation.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's not always clear what's driving those choices.
Right. And then there are even larger scale studies, like one by Rientes and colleagues in 2019, and another by Templer and others that's in Press, showing that worked examples are used a lot in online learning. But again, there are a lot of individual differences. So the bottom line is we're still figuring out why students make the choices they do and what role effort plays in those decisions.
So this brings up a really important question. Can we actually train students to be better at task selection?
Mm,
Can we teach them to be more mindful of their mental effort?
yes. And the research here is pretty exciting. There are studies by Costins and colleagues in 2012 and Rye Makers and others in 2018 that looked at training students to consider both their performance and their effort when choosing what to work on
Oh,
next.
cool. How did that training work?
They used video modeling. So students watched a video of a student model solving a problem, assessing their performance, and then rating their mental effort. And then the model would use a simple algorithm to choose the next task based on that information.
Oh, I like that. So it's like giving them a concrete strategy to follow.
Exactly. So, for example, if the student model did well on a problem, but it took a lot of effort, the algorithm might suggest a similar problem to build fluency.
Okay, so like stick with this for a bit, but maybe not jump to something harder just yet.
Right. Or if they did well and it was easy, then maybe it's time for something more challenging.
Makes sense. And what were the results of this training? Did it actually help students learn better?
It did. They found improvements in self-assessment accuracy, task selection accuracy, and even learning outcomes on post-tests. And what's even more interesting is that Rye Makers and colleagues found that even using more general heuristics like, I did well, but it was hard, so I'm ready for something tougher, was helpful.
Oh, wow. So you don't need a super complicated system. Just being more aware can make a difference. But what about transfer? If you learn these skills in one subject, do they transfer to other subjects?
That's a great question, and it's something researchers are still exploring. Rye Makers and his team found that training in biology didn't automatically lead to better performance in math. So, more research is needed to understand how these skills can be generalized.
Okay, so there's still work to be done there. But overall, this has been a really fascinating deep dive. Can we sum up the key takeaways for our listeners?
Absolutely. So, first, mental effort is crucial for learning, but it's complex. It impacts how you judge your understanding and how you choose what to learn next. Second, effort can be a clue to your understanding, but you have to interpret it carefully, considering your actual performance.
And third, actively engaging with the material, using those generative activities, can provide really valuable feedback.
Right. Being mindful of both your performance and your effort can lead to better learning choices. And while training these skills shows promise, we're still learning about how they transfer to new situations.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. How can you start paying more attention to the effort you're putting in? Can you use that information, along with your performance, to guide your future learning? What generative activities can you add to your routine to really get a clear picture of your understanding? This is a super exciting area of research, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great having you.